Hello, welcome back to IPBC Asia 2013. I'm speaking now to the editor-in-chief of IAM, Intellectual Asset magazine. He is Joff Wild, and you're also the creator of this conference. Joff, tell us how you started out back in Amsterdam in 2008.
Well, basically, a colleague and I were on an aeroplane coming back from a conference, and we thought that maybe there was an opportunity to create something slightly different in the marketplace, and so we brainstormed what our ideal conference would be and then decided that we'd go ahead and do it. We think that the IP marketplace, in terms of IP as a business asset, is something that doesn't get enough coverage, both in the written media and also in conferences, and we decided that this event would be where the IP marketplace came together to discuss the major issues facing people working in the marketplace.
So how has the conference evolved since 2008, and what are the next steps in the evolution?
Well, I think the conference has evolved in the sense that we've got people from a much wider range of industries coming along now, and from many more countries. When we started off, it was much more about what was going on in North America and in Europe, but now obviously we're in Asia. The Asian marketplace is beginning to really blossom. Asian companies are getting much more focused on intellectual property, and so what I think we're going to be doing into the future is expanding in Asia, increasing our coverage of Asia, and really emphasising the fact that this is a part of the world where exciting things are happening.
And you've got new venues for conferences too.
Absolutely, yeah. I think next year we'll be looking at going back to China. We were in Beijing last year. I think next year we're looking at going back to Shanghai, and then for the global event we're back in Amsterdam next June, and then the year after that we were in San Francisco.
You have secured quite a lot of sponsors for this event, which is notable considering how you find many different types of business conferences in other areas, in other disciplines, I suppose.
Yeah.
Finding it quite tough at times to find sponsors. What do the sponsors actually get out of sponsoring IPBC?
Well, I think if you're an IPBC sponsor, what you're doing is making a very strong statement about the fact that you are active in this marketplace, that you get the fact that IP is a business asset, that you see it something much more than just being about the law, which is traditionally where IP has sat. And what you're doing is making a statement about what you are as a business. And you're also putting yourselves in front of people that are at a very senior level in the marketplace and are able to make very big decisions.
It's interesting that you say that IP is much more than just the law, because as editor-in-chief, I suppose, you're also aware of the trends, how things have changed over the 5 or 6 years that since you took on that position. So how has the tone changed at the conference and also in the magazine in terms of how people are talking about IP?
Well, I think what started off as something that people thought could be an industry, that IP could be an asset, over the last few years IP has become an industry, and IP is now seen as an asset. And so what we were talking about in theory a few years ago, we're now talking about in practice. And what we're also talking about is it happening right across the world, not just in the US and in parts of Europe where it used to happen. It's happening everywhere, and it's particularly beginning to happen here in Asia.
What are some of the more surprising stories that have come across your desk over the last year?
Surprising stories, I guess one of the most interesting stories, I think, is the way that IP is emerging as a political issue. I was very surprised to hear President Obama talk specifically about patents earlier this year, maybe not talking about them in the way that a lot of people in this industry would like him to talk about them, but the fact that he actually sees them as an issue now is incredibly important. You're seeing IP being used in trade negotiations. You're seeing certain countries, Brazil and Antigua, for example, threatening to actually put sanctions against American intellectual property because they see the leverage that can get them in certain trade disputes that they have with the Americans. If you were to ask me about 5 years ago whether I thought that it would be at this high level, I would have said absolutely no chance at all, but there's been a real explosion over the last few years, and that's very exciting.
Well, President Obama was talking about IP in the context of the new patent laws which he was enacting to reduce the litigiousness of the industry, I suppose. Do you see that as a positive development from your objective, omniscient, shall we say, point of view?
I see it as encouraging that someone like Obama believes that IP is important enough for him to take an interest in. I'm not as delighted to see the way in which he is taking that interest. I think he has a very skewed view of the patent system. I think that a lot of politicians tend to see in very black and white terms that certain patent owners are good people and other patent owners are very bad people, and that something has to be done to stop the bad people from inflicting pain on everyone else. I think that what we need, though, is a much more nuanced view of what's happening in the marketplace, that there are good people, bad people, and a lot of people in the middle. And actually, you really shouldn't be making moral judgments about something that is fundamentally a business issue. If people are following the law, if they're doing stuff that's legal, then I don't see the problem with anyone using what is essentially a business asset in the way that they feel is most appropriate to their needs.
Well, President Obama says he's only halfway done. The laws that he enacted don't go the full length of what he wants to see.
Yeah, absolutely. He wants to come down hard on what he considers are patent trolls. What I think has happened is that certain people have got into President Obama's ear, and other people have lacked the ability to do that. And so I think he's getting a very skewed view of what's going on. There are certain people that have an agenda, and that agenda is they don't like the patent system. They want to see it reduced, either because philosophically or politically they don't like it, or in other cases because the patent system impedes their business model.
The irony is that here in Singapore, the government has encouraged businesses to register their IP, has encouraged them to create more intellectual property that can be licensed globally. I suppose that's partly because of the size of the Singapore economy and the size of the country. But as more governments recognize the value of IP, do you think that pendulum is going to kind of swing back a little bit, that it's not going to be so focused on the patent trolls, but that there will be a greater appreciation, including by President Obama, that that there can be a middle ground found?
Well, I think President Obama does appreciate the value of intellectual property. I think if you look at the way that the US negotiates trade agreements, IP is always a very strong element in those trade agreements. What he doesn't seem to be doing is equating IP with patents, and the fact that if you curtail the rights of certain patent owners, you're sending a message to the rest of the world that maybe it's okay for them to curtail the rights of certain IP owners who may or may not be American. And so it's a kind of a mixed message that's being sent out from the US, I think, about IP. But fundamentally, I think the US understands just how important IP is to the American economy, absolutely. And in Asia, I think there are many countries now that are beginning to wake up to the fact that you can't really have a developed 21st century economy unless you have fundamental protection of IP rights, and companies in your country are creating IP rights that can be used to build businesses. Including in China? I mean, to some extent it is an irony that you are holding an IP conference in China. Do you see that changing too there? I think the Chinese are very, very fixed on intellectual property. I think they understand the fact that intellectual property and respect for intellectual property is going to be very important for them as they move forward.
That might surprise some people.
It would surprise a lot of people, I think, because the view that we get of China from the general media is that everything there is negative. But actually, when you talk to people on the ground operating in the country, they do tell you there are major challenges, but that if you take the time to do your due diligence, if you engage with the system, there are ways of getting things done. And moving forward, I think those ways are going to become much easier and much more transparent, because the Chinese themselves now are creating IP and they need a system that works.
It's great to talk to you, Joff, and we look forward to continuing to follow that story in your magazine. Thanks again for taking the time today. Joff Wild, the Editor-in-Chief of Intellectual Asset magazine, here at the IPBC Asia Conference.